I have a burden in my heart about social media posts. Like I ask myself all the time, when I preach in congregation, I ask them, if an alien from Mars were to come here and look at your social media posts, would they think you are a follower of Jesus or a religious pundit? When they looked at it. Number 4, COVID revealed the urgent necessity to be intentional about our mental health. I don't know when it happened. I don't know why it happened. But I've always been afraid of the dark. I could not sleep in a room that is completely dark. I would get anxiety. And I always learned how to cope with that reality. So God has a great sense of humor, because my job implies sleeping in hotel rooms 5 out of 7 nights every week. So I'm thinking to myself, why is it that I'm perfectly fine and I shut the light off and this anxiety comes over me? Where does that come from? Why does it happen? So I'm trying to read up on it, and I can't understand it. And then finally, I went to a counselor and we started processing these things, and I am on the other side of it, and it took me years because there's a stigma attached. Like, you are supposed to be whole in order to be able to lead. And if you admit that you have weaknesses and traumas, and you and your spouse are not getting along, and there's issues with your kids, it's hard to get up to preach about the family when your own kids told you that morning, I don't want to go to church anymore. And we have issues with mental health, but there's a stigma. I remember my first sermon. This is what it was reinforced for the rest of my ministry. My first sermon that I preached on the family. I was recently married, and my senior pastor said, we're going to do a series on the family, and I want you to preach. And I said, well, I just got married. He said, it doesn't matter, just preach. So I prepared my sermon, and I talked about how my wife and I were not getting along in the financial area. Because we would sit down and do the bills, and we were arguing, like, why did you spend that? And she's like, why did you spend that? And it's like, we were spending money we don't have to buy things we don't need to impress people we didn't like. That was our life. And I shared with the congregation, my wife and I can't get on the same page financially. She keeps the checkbook. Everybody remember when you used to keep the checkbook and write all this stuff down? Oh my word. We used to keep it, and we would have a fight every single month. At the end of the month, we had to reconcile all the stuff, like, why'd you spend this and why? And it went on for several months. And I talked to the congregation and I said, this is what we're trying to do to get better at it. And I left it unresolved, because nobody has an issue when you talk about the victories you've already achieved. It's the present struggles that people have an issue with. At the end of that sermon, I was in the back, and this lady said, Pastor, I need to talk to you. When somebody says, I need to talk to you, and they use the finger, it's never like, I'm going to give you $100. I need to talk to you. Here's a gift card. I need to talk to you. It's like, come here. She said, never do that again. I'm like, never do what? She said, you talked about that you and your wife were having issues with the finances. Never speak about that again. If you are having issues and you're the pastor, what hope is there for us? Have mercy. And it was reinforced. I must pretend everything is fine. I must act and preach as if all my struggles are past tense. I cannot bare my soul. I cannot talk about stuff that I'm fighting. And we have to be appropriate in what we share and how we share. But there's people in the congregation that when you are vulnerable and real and saying, listen, I've talked about families for 30 years. And I have 4 children. And everybody here that has children, more than one, understand that there's always one alien in your family. everybody's going in one direction. There's always one. Why do I have to do that? And you're like, but we raised you all the same way. What in the world? You know how hard it is to talk about the fact that I have 3 daughters and 1 son. And he just, from the moment he was little, he was like, why do we need to do that? And why do we need to do that? And why do we do, just very rebellious. It's hard to talk about family and helping parents with their kids when yours is doing crazy stuff. Like, I mean crazy stuff. And this pandemic has been terrible for a lot of us. But I'll tell you, in March of 2020, my son got really sick. He's in the military, and he was in quarantine for 10 days. And in those 10 days, after years of fasting and praying for him, he met Jesus for the first time. But he was 22. For 22 years, that wasn't his story. You have to talk about all the positive things and how your sex life is fantastic and there's never arguments and you always refer about your spouse and use them in illustrations and your kids. And the problem is that your kids grow up in this bubble, in this glass bowl. They did not ask to be pastor's kids. One of the first things I told my board is my kids are going to be just like anybody else's kid. Don't ever tell them you're pastor's kids and you do that. Both my brothers are out of the church because that's the life they were raised in. I have to be intentional about my mental health. So during the pandemic, I went to a counselor, dealt with some issues. I'm better for it. Before we got married, my wife and I, she had some abuse in her past. She tells the story, and we went to counseling for a whole year. The reason our sex life today is awesome is because, number one, we're empty nesters. This is awesome. I want to praise God. I want to praise God for empty nesters. Thank you. And it's because we dealt with the issue for a whole year in counseling. There was healing that took place. And the counselor said, if you had not dealt with this, now it would have affected you for the rest of your life. I want to be committed to my own mental health. And take time for me, and for rest, and to shut it off. And number 5, COVID revealed the difference between discipleship and membership. I sometimes wonder, I'm just going to throw this out there, sometimes wonder if the reason we feel a certain kind of way about people not being in the building. I wonder if the reason we feel that way is because we care about their personal salvation, or is it because we care about personal egos. People are not coming to listen to me preach. What's wrong with me? See, it's never been about you. It's never going to be about you. We have members and we have disciples. And I ask when I do like church evaluations and have conversations, I ask one simple question, and I get a lot of blank stares and a lot of hums and hums. I say, if you could describe to me in a minute or less, what is your intentional process to turn people who are far from God into disciples? What would you tell me that process is? If somebody shows up to your church on Sabbath morning, who's an irreligious person, a person who's not religious, a person who's not a follower of Jesus, and they come in the first day, what is your intentional process to turn that person into a disciple? I said, we have a Bible worker. You know that giving truth to an unconverted heart without Jesus is only going to make that person an unconverted know-it-all. Somebody knows, but is not converted, and the only thing that converts is Jesus. What is the process? How do we take people from 0 to disciple? Not about how many people I can have in my church, how many people are attending. The metrics that we use to measure success in ministry is the 3 B's. Buildings, baptisms, and budgets. How much money are people giving? How many people come on Sabbath morning? Once again, I know that whatever I expect from people is usually what I get back. So we have the lowest common denominator discipleship plan. Because not everybody latches onto it, we won't do it for anybody. Instead of saying, okay, not everybody gets on the same train. Not everybody is at the same level. So who are the people who are really committed that want to follow this process? Because discipleship is contagious. So it exposed the difference between discipleship and membership. That's the only theory I have of the reason why, even though there's less people in the pews, there's more giving in the coffers. People are giving and they're not showing up. So it used to be that those used to be, they correlated. You have more people attending, there was more money giving. So what happened? This does not match. And I feel like in the beginning of the pandemic, we're a little bit more intentional about like, hey, how can we disciple people now? But all of a sudden, people started giving and we sort of like relaxed. It's like, hey, we're good, man. Buildings paid, tithes are coming in, we're good, we're just going to chill. What is your intentional process to take somebody from a person who's not religious, who's far from God, to a fully committed disciple of Jesus? Who reproduces disciples. What is that process? How does it look like? It doesn't have to look like everybody else's, because disciples are not mass produced, they're individually made. But what is the process? Just because a process doesn't work for everybody doesn't mean that it cannot work for somebody. Use it. So, 5 things that COVID revealed. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to go into reconnecting. So take 10 minutes in pastoral terms. That's 15. That's okay. Take 10 minutes. Get up. Come back in 10 minutes. We'll go to the next presentation.